All right, good morning, everyone. We're so glad that you could join us for the live webinar. We will be recording this webinar for those that could not attend live, but we will be stopping the recording when we start Q&A so that you can ask your questions without being worried about being recorded. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project that is the background and the funding for this program, but we're really excited to have this webinar today, integrating cover crops into crop and livestock systems, with our guest presenter, Steven Hines, who's an extension educator in crops in Jerome County in Jerome, Idaho. So we're going to talk about a lot of exciting things today, but first of all, just a few tips for having a good experience during this webinar. So number one, if you close other programs running on your computer, you're less likely to have interference with your video or your sound. If you are having problems with your sound, you can either switch microphones or speakers, kind of play with those settings in Zoom, or you can actually call in on the number and listen on the phone while watching the video. We do have live Q&A going on the whole time during this webinar. You can type your questions into the chat. You can either ask them directly to one of the speakers, or you can put them out to the whole group. And then, like I said, we will be recording this and posting it online, and everyone who registered for the webinar will receive an invitation to watch the recording. And then eventually we will have a landing page for all of the webinars so that anybody can watch any of them again as many times as they want. And I think this is going to be one that you're going to want to watch again. So who's behind this? So University of Idaho Extension and the Farmer Veteran Coalition of Idaho chapter are bringing you this series. We're both committed to improving the economic opportunities and quality of life for military veterans who might choose agriculture as their next mission. So this webinar is part of a multifaceted project that we've collaborated on to reduce risk for military veterans who are engaging in agriculture. It's funded through a Western Extension Risk Management Education Center grant. And so over the next year, or I guess it's 18 months or so, we will be developing and delivering multifaceted classes, workshops, webinars, and podcasts on production, marketing, financial, legal, and human risk management education. And our focus is really on new and beginning veteran farmers across the state, but we are also going to include topics that may be of interest to those who are a little bit more experienced. We'll be presenting monthly webinars and podcasts, and then beginning this fall, we will be hosting regional in-person workshops and tours in each corner of the state. So we hope that you stay tuned and can join us for these. So who we are, I'm Ariel Agenbrad. I'm an area extension educator in community food systems and small farms for University of Idaho Extension. And I've been working on veterans in agriculture since about 2017-18, when I met this lovely lady, Connie May, who is retired Air Force, and she's been serving as our program coordinator on our veterans programs for several years now. And she's also currently the president of the Idaho Veteran Coalition. So very convenient partnership between us. So just a little bit about the project. We are going to be doing 10 webinars and 10 podcast recordings. So right now, this is the second webinar. The first one has already concluded. It was on NRCS programs that veterans could access, and that one has been recorded and posted. And then we just finished recording the second episode of our Harvest Heroes podcast. And so with the webinars, we are really focusing on service providers, educators, not increasing your knowledge. And then with the podcast, we are highlighting veteran farmers and ranchers who are implementing risk management techniques on their farms and ranches and really sharing their stories. And really, I think both of these have been a lot of fun so far, and we've got good content coming. The regional workshops and tours that are coming up, these we're already starting to plan the first one. These are going to be 2-day intensive workshops focused on risk management topics for all the areas that I mentioned previously. It will be a combination of in-class intensive hands-on workshops, meeting with service providers, and then also touring veteran farms in the area. And so I've got some of my extension colleagues on the phone today. I will be reaching out to set up some meetings with all of you to talk about what we have planned, to find out how we can collaborate, and to bring in what you have to offer and what we can offer and collaborate on these tours and workshops. So we're very excited about them. And they will be free of charge, and meals will be provided thanks to the grant. So a little bit about University of Idaho Extension. So we are the community outreach and education arm of our College of Agricultural and Life Sciences. And as you can see, we are statewide. So even if you haven't heard of University of Idaho, or you wonder why you're living somewhere remote in the state, we are there. We are there to serve you and help you. And one of the best places to start is our website. You can get all the information about the different kinds of programs we offer outside of agriculture and how to find the office in your region. And the Farmer Veteran Coalition of Idaho. So there is a national nonprofit, and it is the nation's largest nonprofit that assists veterans with careers in agriculture. We've got a few data points about the national organization, but we have an Idaho chapter. It is very new. We're very excited about that. It is a registered nonprofit, and we're happy to partner together on this program. So in Idaho right now, you can see we have 4 regions that have actually followed the designation for extension regions because it just makes sense. It's a good way to break up the state. We have the most members in the southern part of the state. We also have quite a few in the north, and then plenty in the eastern and central too. It's very easy to join. It's free. You can just follow that QR code or that link to find out more. And what's really neat about the Idaho chapter is that the Idaho FVC has partnered with the Idaho State Department of Agriculture on this logo that you see here in the middle. This is the Homegrown by Heroes logo that veteran farmers who are members of FVC can use to designate and set their products apart as grown by veterans. And Idaho Preferred is our state branding program that lets people know that your product and your, whether it's a food product, a nursery plant, or even a food item, has been produced in Idaho using Idaho ingredients. And so we've combined those 2 logos. And if you are a member of FVC and we kind of work with you, you can actually use this logo on your products to tell buyers a little bit more about who you are and what makes you special. All right, so that's a little bit about us and the project and the programs that we are working on right now. But let's talk about today. So we have a few goals for the webinar today that we hope we will realize. So after participating in this webinar, we hope that you will understand how integrating cover crops into your crop or livestock production could benefit your operation. We hope that you increase your knowledge of how to use cover crops in multiple scenarios for maximum benefit. And we hope that you'll be more prepared to adopt cover crops if they are a good fit for you and your farm. So I first heard this presentation from Steven I guess it was a few months ago at another extension training. And I just really thought this is a great topic. And I think it's one that's going to be interesting to our audience and really can cover a broad range of different production systems. So Steven is the crops educator for Jerome and Twin Falls counties, and he serves the entire region of the Magic Valley. And his areas of expertise include, but are not limited to, cover crop adoption, interseeding cover crop with corn, finding cover crop species for late season planting. That's very important, especially when you have a shorter season. Understanding practices that improve soil health, farm management, and farm succession. And I've known Steven for a long time in Extension and always valued him as a presenter and as a colleague. So I am going to stop talking now and stop sharing my screen. And I am going to invite Steven to bring up his slides and to get us started today.
Okay, thanks, Ariel. We can get this up and going now.
It's coming up.
All right. Okay, are you seeing the correct view?
That looks great. It's all yours.
All right, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. As Ariel said, my name is Steve Hines. I'm the extension educator in Jerome County. And Ariel asked me to give this presentation today specifically about incorporating cover crops into grazing systems. And so we'll kind of jump right in. So when people call or visit with at meetings and whatnot, and they want to talk about cover crops, of course, people go to a lot of meetings and they hear about cover crops and all the great things that they can do, and they get all excited about it. And so they want to go home and plant some cover crops. But I always tell folks when they call me or ask, what are your management goals? It's not just a matter of buying some seed and throw it in the ground and hoping that things happen. You really need to think about what it is that you are trying to accomplish on your farm or ranch. And there's a list of several things here. And today we're really focusing on the grazing side of things. So, it depends on what time of the year do you want that additional graze to be available. Maybe you want to incorporate cover crops for soil health purposes, but you realize that they need to be profitable because cover crops are not free. That seed costs money, the labor costs money, it costs money to get them planted. And so you've got to find ways to make those profitable. There are the soil health things, improving the organic matter, armoring the soil through the winter, recycling nutrients, other soil health practices. And then, of course, there are the 5 pillars of soil health, and kind of integrating livestock back into the farm is sort of that very top level where you've kind of gone through the other kinds of things there and want to get those livestock back into the system there. And of course, you may have some other individual goals yourself that you would like to accomplish. So why would you want to graze cover crops? A few reasons that I've pulled out and put together here. To start with, if we can improve our soil organic matter by 1%, that will increase water holding capacity by about 27,000 gallons, according to NRCS. That's about an inch of water per foot. And that's they will also produce 10 to 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre. The organic matter will produce 10 to 40 pounds of available nitrogen per acre. Now, when we talk about this organic matter, I think it's important to understand, because I've gone to meetings, listened to research, and they say, oh, well, we were able to increase organic matter by 1 or 2% in a year. And maybe they did when they took that soil test, but you are not going to increase permanent soil organic matter by 1% in a year. It's just not going to happen. The researchers who've studied this stuff say that about 0.1% per year. So you're talking a long-term kind of a thing here. When we look, especially here in southern Idaho, our indigenous soils are low in organic matter anyway. If you were to go out into the desert, in the virgin soil that's never been farmed, pull a soil sample, that's going to be 1, maybe 1.5, maybe 2% at the most. So our soils naturally just are not very high in organic matter. So whatever we can do to increase that organic matter is going to be valuable. The other thing is we're in water short years for tight water supplies, it seems like every year. Whatever we can do to increase that water holding capacity of the soil will help. So other reasons, if we look at a cow, a 1,000-pound cow daily in manure and urine produces about 1/4 pound of nitrogen, 1/1500 pound of phosphorus, and about 1/2 pound of potassium. So 50 cows a day are depositing 12 pounds of nitrogen, 7 pounds of phosphorus, and 26 pounds of potassium each day. So if they're out there grazing, they are spreading those nutrients for you and allowing those nutrients to recycle within the system. And that's fertilizer that you are not purchasing later down the road in a synthetic form. So if you're not familiar with cover crops and you're kind of curious, what are they and what can we plant? This is called the cover crop periodic table. Now, I will tell you, there are several of these out there. These were put together by the NRCS. I like this particular one because it was put together by Marlon Winger, who is the regional NRCS agronomist. And he was really looking at, he was stationed over in Wyoming, was looking at kind of higher elevation, colder kind of climate. So this was sort of put together for Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. You will see that it is split into warm season species and cool season species. The warm season, of course, are on the right, the cool season there are on the left. And then it's broken down further by the grasses and then the broadleaves, and then the broadleaves are broken down into the brassicas and the legumes. And so I didn't count through all of these, but as you can see, there are a lot of options to choose from. So a person looks at this for the first time and says, how do I ever figure out which one of these that I'm going to grow? Well, to start with, let's consider the warm season varieties because there are fewer of those. And let me point out, you will see on this that the sun hemp, guar, mung bean, cowpea, and soybean, those that are there in the red. In Idaho, those cannot be grown legally unless that seed has the same phytosanitary certificate as the dry beans that are grown in southern Idaho. And the reason is the southern Idaho bean growers are very interested in keeping bean diseases out of Idaho because Idaho has a disease-free standing. There's a lot of dry bean seed, pinnos and navies and whatnot are grown here and shipped other places. And so you want to be careful about importing those in as well. Also, there are some other rules out there when it comes to the brassicas or the mustards when you look at rapeseed, especially, or well, particularly the rapeseed or canola, because of disease in other parts of the state, particularly North Idaho. So just kind of be aware of some of those. If you're unsure, you can check with the Department of Ag or check with your local extension on that, and they can help you with that. So at any rate, with the warm season species are what they sound like. Those species do well in the warm season. In southern Idaho, or really in Idaho, that's going to be from about June through October, late September anyway. So if you're kind of looking at something that you want to plant sort of early summer that can take advantage of the summer heat, those are some things to think about there. On the cool season, those do better planted earlier in the season or later into the season because they do better in colder weather. And so, you know, I could spend a couple of hours just going through. I've grown most of these to see how they grow in Idaho. That's beyond the scope of where we're at today. Remember that question, what is your management goal? When you determine your management goal, then we can look at some of these and start to put a mix together. So when you're considering various types of cover crop mixes, when we look at the energy values that are available for your livestock, annuals provide more energy than perennials, and the legumes provide more energy than grasses. Think of alfalfa hay as opposed to a grass hay. The warm and cool season grasses are fairly similar in their energy values. When you look at the protein content, annuals have more protein than perennials, and legumes have more protein than grasses. And then cool season grasses tend to have more protein than warm season grasses. These are important considerations, but I think more important is what time of year do you want that graze to be available? That's going to help inform the particular species that you're going to put into your mix. There you go. I think I jumped ahead here a little bit. No, okay. So some other things to think about. When do you want to plant? For example, are you wanting to plant something in the spring? Are you wanting to plant something, what we consider a fall planting, but it's actually midsummer, behind a cereal grain that's coming out, like right now as winter wheat and winter barley harvest is starting to take place? When can you plant? When do you have the time to plant? Available equipment, water, those kinds of things all go into that. Know that the grasses grow faster than the legumes. Legumes provide more nutrients. Do you have enough water to establish cover crops? And I'm thinking specifically like this time of year, as those cereal crops are starting to come off, there's a lot of cover crops that'll be planted right now, but I've heard some guys tell me that they can't plant cover crops this time of year because they just don't have the water for it. And so that's some things to really think about there. The other thing, are there any residual herbicides? For example, maybe you've put down, you're putting cover crops behind a previous cash crop. Did you put down an herbicide that has a carryover that may affect either a grass or a broadleaf? You need to think about that. Also, if you're going to graze these cover crops behind another cash crop, was there an herbicide put down or some kind of pesticide put down that could be picked up by the cover crops that has a grazing restriction on those? You need to pay attention. The previous cash crop, what was put down, and know what those restrictions are when you're thinking about grazing these things. And also, how will cover crops affect the next cash crop? It might be the timing of planting. It might be maybe a cover crop that you've got to come in and control or till out in some ways that will affect the timing for getting that next cash crop put down. And some of these things tend to become weedy a little bit, and I'll talk about that toward the end of this presentation. So here's a picture of some cover crop that was planted. This was probably 2015. I can't remember now. This was out in Twin Falls County, kind of out at the end of the Twin Falls track where the Twin Falls and the Salmon track come together. This was in a low water year. The producer had just purchased this farm, and this had been a perennial pasture for about 50 years. And this producer he's been one of the national soil health champions. He's very interested in keeping this farm as much no-till, if at least minimum till, as possible, and incorporating cover crops as much as possible. In a low water year, this was planted obviously just behind cereals. It got 2 irrigations that year, and that was it. This was taken, I believe, in October, and you can see there's not a lot there, but there is something there. He was not going to graze this, so he was not worried about that. He was more interested in that keeping a diversity of species and a root in the soil year-round, armoring the soil. And so he has done that here with this. So some of the cover crops, they don't necessarily take a lot of water to establish, but obviously not a lot of grazable forage here. And so that's some things to think about. So in that building a mix, there are a few rules of thumb to kind of think about. One of those is the rule of 3. You want a grass, a legume, and a broadleaf in that mix. The other is a principle of diversity. If you're trying to go for that soil health pillar of a diverse number of species in the mix, then you want to look around 6. And then when you plant depends on, or what you plant depends on when you plant and when you want that feed to be available. So let me come back to that species, that at least 6 species in the mix. If you've gone to one of these soil health workshops or you've seen the podcasts or whatnot, and they're talking about these 10 and 12 way mixes, and guys are really excited about those. And what we're looking at here, I think this was a 6 or an 8 way mix on this one. Keep in mind, you don't have to do that. In fact, I would caution, if you have never played with cover crops, I would tell you to plant a mix of 3. Start small, kind of get your feet under you a little bit, Start learning how cover crops grow and may work in your system, and then start building in cover crops based on a management goal. If you're going to add a particular species, have a reason for doing so. Don't just throw a bunch of seed out there because you went to a workshop and got all excited about it. Have a management goal. This particular picture we're looking at here, this is on a farm over in the Hazleton area. They farm between the interstate and the Snake River Canyon. So they're sort of southern Jerome County. A couple of brothers that farm together. Their primary cash crops are sugar beets, grains, alfalfa, and dry beans. After their cereal grains, they come in with a cover crop mix. They also have beef cattle. And so they plant as much as they can starting this time of year into a cover crop mix so that they can, when those cows come home, they graze their cattle all winter long. They don't feed hay. And that's their goal. And they do a really nice job. This particular mix here, you can see some grazing corn in there. There's some radish, some turnips. The grass is just actually the volunteer barley that they brought up. And so they have a management goal, and they have to be cautious. They used to plant hairy vetch in their mix, but hairy vetch can tend to become weedy, and it is also not well controlled with glyphosate. So they were having problems with it as a weed in their sugar beet crops. And so they removed hairy vetch out of that. But still very much, I was just by the farm the other day. They'd obviously planted some stuff in the spring on their pivot corners, and those cows were out there grazing away on that stuff right now during the summer. So, okay, start small and learn. I kind of jumped ahead of myself a little bit here, but you don't have to plant the 12-way mix to start with. Do something simple on a few acres and learn. And the other caution I will tell you is that cover crops get expensive in a hurry. And when you start looking at the perennial legumes, doesn't matter whether it's a clover, whether it's an alfalfa or something like that, those get expensive in a hurry. Those will be pound per pound the most expensive seed you buy. So if you're going to put a perennial legume in your mix, have a reason for it. My experience has been, and I've been messing with cover crops now for about 12 years, in a variety of different scenarios. What I have found is if you want to plant cover crops in a calendar year and graze them out, or come back in the spring and graze them before you till and put in the next cash crop, you will not recover the benefit of a perennial legume, which is generally building nitrogen in your soil. They don't do well in competition. So if you can't keep that perennial legume in for an entire growing summer, I just think that there are some better options out there for you. The picture that you're looking at here, this was a seed mix that we messed with several years ago. Actually, the farmer that we were working with bought this from his seed provider. And I just took this picture to show you how busy this cover crop mix is. I can tell you what these guys were looking at. This was a several thousand acre farm. They milked several thousand dairy cows, and they also had several hundred head of beef cattle. And so what they were doing is they were interseeding into corn, and at this time they were flying it on at about V5, V6, something like that. Interseeding that, so when all that silage corn came off for the dairy, they had winter graze all winter long for the beef cow herds, and they just moved them across from pivot to pivot all winter long, so they didn't have to feed hay because their alfalfa hay went into the dairy side of the business. So again, coming back to this, know your goal and then put your mix together. The rule of thumb we go by, or that I go by, is your cover crop mix. You want somewhere in that neighborhood of 30 to 40 pounds an acre. Much more than that, and it starts getting expensive. Growers have told me they're willing to pay $35 to $40 an acre for seed. Above that, it gets too expensive. And roughly, your mix should contain about 1 million seeds to the acre. And there's some calculators out there to help you figure that out. Sometimes I hit that with my mixes, and sometimes I don't. I stick closer to the 30 to 40 pounds per acre than I do the 1 million seeds per acre, because if you're putting in something like some peas and you're using a larger seed, to get to that 1,000,000 pounds an acre, you'd have to put a lot of that down, and that doesn't work in particular mixes. So, if you're not sure, get some help. There's help out there. There's some calculators out there. NRCS is a good point of contact, and Extension has some resources for that as well. Kind of show you what I mean. When we did a demonstration, this was 12 or 10 years ago now, you can see we had a grant, so we had money. And so we were looking at mixes for forage and cover. And our first year, we got all excited and put this great mix together. And you can see for the forage side, we put down 140 pounds to the acre, and it cost $86 an acre in seed to do that. And some of the very expensive of that was that hairy vetch and starfire clover, and those were about $3 a pound. We got nothing out of those in these mixes. On the grazing side, obviously, we just planted a little bit less, a little bit different mixture. 40 pounds to the acre cost $43 to the acre. And on one farm, we did one on one half a pivot and one on the other half a pivot. And we went in and did clippings later for yield. And the cover mix, which cost far less, yielded just as much grazable forage as our forage mix. There was just too much competition going on. So the next year we got smarter. Oh, maybe I didn't put that in here. So the next year, oh, there it is. We cut this down and did a much more sensible mix, 60 pounds to the acre, which cost $42, or just a cover only 40 pounds to the acre, which cost $28. And notice we took out those expensive perennial legumes and kind of got a mix that we thought that we could work with a little bit better. Let's look at the prices here. Now, these were costs from 2014 and 2015, so they've gone up a little bit. But you can see the peas, you're looking at 39 cents a pound versus vetch, which was $1.45 a pound, and red clover, which was $3.20 a pound. So those perennial legumes were expensive to throw in this mix. I think the turnip and radish, I think the price on those has come up because they're so popular, and ones that we use quite a bit. They grow really well. Cattle graze on them really well. They grow really well into cold weather. If they overwinter, the radish will overwinter. Turnip sometimes, if it's not a real cold winter, will overwinter. So they just work really well in grazing mixes, and actually one that I use quite a bit. So let's talk about some concerns as you're thinking about incorporating cover crops. One of those is prussic acid. And prussic acid accumulates in the warm season grasses such as sorghum Sudan. It can accumulate in corn. It's not so much a problem we have found as it can be in sorghum and the sorghum Sudan, those types of warm season grasses. What happens is they get stressed either from drought or frost, and so they stop growing. And when they start to regrow in that new growth that's going to be at the top of the grass there, this hydrogen cyanide accumulates, and if it's grazed too early and doesn't allow that to dissipate through the normal processes in the plant, then that can become a real poisoning problem. I always tell people with its grazing, get it tested before you start, both for nitrate, which I'll talk about here on the next slide, and for prussic acid, because a few bucks for a test is nothing compared to losing cattle. And I've seen some situations on farms where several cattle have died because of nitrates, and that's way more expensive than getting a test. So get it tested. On the bottom here is a graph about what those prussic acid levels would look like on a dry matter basis. you can find this information online, and of course, the lab will give you the results and tell you where you're at with that. So just think about that. If you have some of those warm season grasses, it's getting late in the season, it's frosted hard, and you're ready to put your livestock out on the cover crop, either let that stuff go for a few days or get it tested. Nitrate's probably a bigger concern because so many species are nitrate accumulators. Same kind of thing, frost damage, drought, hail, something that causes that plant to quit growing. Well, while it's not growing, the roots are still pumping nitrogen up into the plant in the form of nitrate. And so it's in the lower part of the plant there, and they come in and they graze that and too early, and they can get nitrate poisoning. So again, I would tell you to get it tested, because just almost anything that can be grown as a cover crop is a nitrate accumulator. And so just think about that. If you're putting livestock out on stressed pasture, stressed cover crop, that I really caution you to get that tested. It just is not terribly expensive to do so, and the tests are quick. Okay, of weedy concern, I mentioned this a little bit. So hairy vetch can become a real weed. We've got a problem with it out on the research farm in Kimberly. We've grown a lot of it. In fact, the farm manager is almost to the point, I think, of outlawing any hairy vetch plantings on the farm from here on out, because of that hard seed, it can lay in the soil for a long time, and so it's just there, and it's not well controlled necessarily by herbicides, and so I really don't recommend hairy vetch. I think that there are other legumes out there that you can use. Cereal rye. I really like cereal rye as a cover crop because I swear that stuff will grow all winter long. It germinates when it's cold, so it will, if it's planted, for example, this time of year, it will grow and stay green well into the winter. And it comes out of spring dormancy earlier than anything else that we plant. So if you're looking for something that you want to survive the winter, get some grazing on in the fall, survive the winter, and then get some grazing on in the spring before you come back into another cash crop, cereal rye is a good one. The reason it's up here of a weedy concern is because it definitely can become a weed if you let it go to seed, and you're a wheat or a barley grower. I would just caution you, probably stay away from this. And I'm guessing if you're a wheat or barley grower, you already know that. Down here, when I talk about cereal rye, I think they want to start coming after me with pitchforks. In fact, we put a mix together a few years ago and brought in some cereal rye, and we wanted the company that we were buying it from to mix it for us, and they would not open the bag of cereal rye in their facility. We had to bring it to Kimberly to open. And it's a great forage, but you just got to be careful. And if you're worried about it going to seed, terminate it early. But it is a phenomenal. In fact, if you're trying to get something green and you don't have a lot of time to do it, cereal rye or buckwheat are your two of choices, and both of those are grazable. But they're both the same kind of problem. And I'll just jump right down to buckwheat. Grows really well. It will germinate fast, provides great ground cover in a hurry, but it goes to seed in about 60 days, and it can become a serious contaminant in cereal grain crops. And because for whatever reason, Asian peoples tend to have an allergy to buckwheat more so than others. Of course, any of our wheat or barley that is sent to the Asian countries, if they detect buckwheat in it, they reject the entire load. And so buckwheat can have some specific advantages to it, but unless what you're looking for can specifically be answered with buckwheat, I would tend to stay away from that. if you're a cereal grain grower. And then annual ryegrass. And I don't care if you call it annual ryegrass or Italian ryegrass. People can fight all day long about whether or not they're the same thing. They basically are the same thing, okay, for all intents and purposes here. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but just about every commercial mixed, pre-mixed cover crop mixes that you buy are going to have annual ryegrass in it. Now, it's a great grass, establishes quickly, grows well, is a wonderful livestock feed, et cetera, et cetera. But if it goes to seed and gets away, it can become a real problem. In fact, in northern Idaho, it is a huge problem in the wheat production systems up there. And it's pretty much considered a weed. Annual ryegrass is resistant to 9 different herbicide classes. One of those is glyphosate. I have seen it. It's resistant in glyphosate in one farm that we were working with. And so, if you can tolerate it or you don't grow wheat or barley, you're not worried about that. It's a great one to put in there. But again, if you have a cereal system, I think that there are better than annual ryegrass. The mustards and rapeseed, which are, of course, are major components of cover crop mixes. Of course, we have just dozens of weeds that are within the brassica family. Just know that those can become problems. And so if you are commercially growing mustards or rapeseed in your farming system, most of that would be in northern Idaho, you would probably want to stay away from those in your cover crop mixes. And in clovers, clovers can just become weeds because they, again, like hairy vetch, it has hard seed and just can persist for years. And you can spray it out and you think you got it gone and it comes back. And so, in fact, I was on a phone call the other day with a guy like, how do I get rid of clover in my pasture? He said, I spray it out and it just keeps coming back. And well, that's just kind of what it does. Whoops, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. Okay, probably the final concern I have here, and then with the time we have left, there are some questions. Voles can be a real issue, and they are a major issue across the Magic Valley this year. I don't know about other places in the state. I know, actually, if you were to start from the Wyoming border and come across, voles are just a major problem. If we plant overwintering cover crops, we leave a lot of residue. We've just developed a perfect home for them. What you're looking at here was a study we did several years ago. This was a grazing study, and we were looking at cover crops that were winter grazed versus leaving some forage for spring grazing. So if you kind of look at the 4 quadrants that I have here, if you look at the one that would be in the upper right-hand corner that's nice and green, and then in the lower right-hand corner, I don't have my line quite right there, but you can see the edge there where it's green, or in the lower left-hand corner there where it's green. That was cover crop that was winter grazed all winter long. And then the cattle were removed, and we've got the cover crop starting to come back in the spring. That's triticale mostly that you're seeing come back there. On the other would be on the left-hand upper quadrant, and then on the right-hand lower quadrant where there's nothing. That was cover crop that was not grazed through the winter. Well, let me state that differently. It was grazed with voles all winter long, but no cattle. So you can see where there were no cattle, hoping to get some spring graze, the voles ate it all. And every little green thing that was trying to grow in there, as we were walking out through there, you could see where there was a vole hole, and they were just eating every brand new thing that was trying to come. There was nothing there for cows, but there was certainly spring graze where the cattle had been winter grazed and then pulled off. You could have brought cows back on there and grazed that some more before this was tilled in. I think he went into corn for his next cash crop that same year with this in this particular field. And so here's a little better look on the right-hand side. You can see the triticale starting to come back there. There's some vetch coming there. You can't see that very well. The only green on the left-hand side where the voles graze is Canada thistle. And the voles were pretty much down to having to eat the Canada thistle because they'd eaten everything else. And so nothing there for the cows to graze. Certainly would have been some graze on the right-hand side. I think the cows did two things. They obviously they ate the food source, and I think they stomped out the vole holes and kept life miserable enough for the voles that the voles went other places. And here's a picture of that same left-hand side, kind of that big plot there. All you see that's green there is Canadian thistle. They're just eating everything else, the voles do. And where the cows graze through the fall and winter and then pull them off, and then that triticale is coming back nice. So to kind of wrap up here in, looks like we've got about 5 minutes or so. You've really got to have a management plan on where cover crops fit in your grazing system. I always like to say, cover crops are not just this magical set of plants that you grow, and you go to these meetings and you think that the unicorns and the pots of gold are just going to happen in your fields, and they're really not that. You have to have a management goal. I think they fit, and I think grazing makes an obvious choice if you are going to include cover crop. I will tell you, there's a grower here in Jerome, and they run several hundred acres, and they also run several hundred head of cattle. He was for decades. He grew up on a typical row crop farm where they had the typical crop mix of the Magic Valley: sugar beets, alfalfa, cereal grains, dry beans, corn, and they ran their cattle out on the desert on BLM, and then they fed their cows hay all winter long. And he kind of got tired of putting up with BLM and all the nonsense, and decided, he wanted to get out of his grazing permits and just bring his cows home. But how do you do that? What do you do with your cows? And we're talking hundreds of cows. Well, he's actually one of the very first growers we started working with when we started figuring out cover crops about 12 years ago. And he now has quit farming the typical crop mix, the rotational crop mix, and he runs cows on his entire farm, except for he does grow some hay, in fact, all of which he sells to a neighboring dairy now. So he's got the income from that, and he grazes his cows year-round without hay. And how does he do that? He uses perennial pastures during the summer while the cover crops are growing, and then all winter long, he grazes those cows on cover crop. And then in the spring, as the pastures are ready to take the cows again, he rotates those cows back onto the perennial pastures, plants new cover crop, lets that grow through the summer, and he just keeps his cows going round and around and around on his farm. Doesn't feed a bale of hay. He only has a tractor now on the farm, and a manure spreader and some things like that. Sold all of his equipment, and feeds his cows cover crop and sells the hay, and has that money coming in from that alfalfa from the dairy as well. So even on a large scale, there are ways to make this work if you want to make that happen. So with that, Ariel, I think I'll wrap up and take any questions if there are any. And again, my contact information, I'm at the Jerome County Extension office, and you can look us up on the website, and feel free to email or call me. I'd love to visit cover crops with you.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. That was great information. We do have a few questions in the chat if you wouldn't mind answering those. And then if anybody else has any, now's a great time to ask those.
Sure, let me
So
pull these up here.
I can read you the questions too, if that makes it easier.
I have them up here.
Okay.
So where do you recommend getting it tested? So for nitrate or for prussic acid. So in our area here, we have 2 or 3 commercial labs that will do that. In the Boise Valley, there's a lab over in Parma, Western
Yep.
Labs, I think, is their name. I don't know if Diamond Labs is still in business or not over there, but any lab that would test your forage for feed quality would be able to do this in your area. So you'll just, if you're not right in Southern Idaho, we have a lot of labs in Southern Idaho. If you don't have one available, check locally with your extension office and see who they would recommend. For example, in Northern Idaho, I'm not sure who would do that. Okay, what lab organizations test for nitrates? So it's kind of the same thing. Any of your local commercial forage testing labs would do that. Okay, can you recommend a few other extension or NRCS resources to go to along with this presentation? I think a really good place to start with, if you just Google NRCS soil health, they have an entire web presence revolving around all of these kinds of things. And I think that's where I would start. From there, they have links to lots of other places that you would go. But I think that NRCS soil health website is probably the best place to start for that. For extension, we are starting to get a few publications out there. And you can go look in our publications resources on the University of Idaho Extension website and find some things there that we have been able to get out there as well. Okay, good sources for seed. In our area, any of our agronomic companies can get seed for us. So I would recommend to check with local seed suppliers where you're at. Some others outside of Idaho, of course, of extension, we don't really like to recommend one over the other. But outside of Idaho, if you want to buy just a few pounds of something to play with a little bit, I like Green Cover Seed. Their seed by the pound is a little bit more expensive, but they have a wide variety of things. They have a great set of resources, and that might be, Ariel, another online place that they could go check. They have phenomenal resources explaining the seed, explaining the growing conditions, when you would plant it, all that kind of stuff, how to terminate it. They are just a fabulous resource there as well. And so I've purchased a lot of seed from them because in my research demonstration, I'm buying a pound of this and a pound of that. And the local agronomic companies, they want to bring it in by the 50-pound bag kind of thing, so.
Great.
Yeah, okay, what else?
And then just another question that I thought of. So say you're doing multi-species grazing, or where would you find the best information on appropriate species of cover crop for appropriate livestock species? Say you're doing goats or sheep or cattle or even pigs.
I have not seen anything particular on swine. Normally, we don't think too much of swine, but that is starting to be something, I think, especially on a smaller scale, people are wanting to graze swine, and swine do really well grazing, and it's a lot cleaner situation for them. There are some cover crop calculators out there that, for example, the Midwest Cover Crop Council has a calculator. The Southern Cover Crop Council has a calculator. The Western Cover Crop Council is currently building one. And that is hopefully going to be released here fairly soon. Let's see, there's a book out there put out by SARE called Managing Cover Crops Profitably. And I think they have some information that touches on that a little bit. I would have to go back and look at that NRCS soil health website. But I think they have some stuff that touches on that a little bit as well.
Okay.
And if nothing else, make some contacts with your local extension folks. Because I'm trying to think if there's anything, there are some species out there that I probably should caution that that may have some slight toxicities. For example, make a light colored animal's skin a little bit more sensitive to the sun, some of that kind of stuff. But I do know that there's information on that out there. For example, that managing cover crop profitably. And that is a great resource. If you're looking at just getting started into cover crops, get that book. It's available from Western SARE or from SARE. It's not very expensive, and it's just an excellent resource. In fact, notice how close I have it right here to my desk. And if you can, my camera's not picking that up very well. But anyway, that's the book right there. And mine kind of looks like my Bible. If you go through it, it's outlined and highlighted and all that kind of stuff. So at any rate, a great resource there.
Wonderful. Any questions from anybody else? All right. Well, I think this was just chock full of such practical information and really helpful. And I hope that that those of you that are watching live and those of you that are watching the recording follow up with some of the resources, and certainly reach out to us if you have additional questions, and we will try to get those answered. Thank you so much, Steven. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to future collaborations.
Yep, you bet. Glad to help.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.